Hello folks, welcome back. In this video, we are going to discuss how to cheat life and one of its beautiful challenges. Okay, so throughout this course, you've actually seen how I share my program, and I already have the code written out for a lot of the videos that you guys are watching. However, I explain the code in its entirety and what to import and what is what and so on. And if you've watched this course from the beginning of the class, you've actually seen that I've shifted from actually writing out the program with you to having the programs already written out so that I can spend more time explaining the concepts to you. Okay. However, I really do hope that you are actually writing the exact same code that I have so that you could be, getting better with Selenium and increasing your confidence for sure. Okay. However, one of the most time-consuming tasks, is for a test automation engineer is inspecting elements, especially if you're using a tool that requires programming. Now, with record and playback tools, they usually have some internal mechanism or feature built in the tool that can inspect elements for you. So we already discussed that there are 8 different ways to locate elements with Selenium. And we talked about ID, tag name, class name, and so on, right? XPath, CSS selector, and so on. But the thing is, in most projects, we actually don't use all of them all the time. This all depends on the project that you're on, by the way. Usually, if you are in a project that has a smooth or established test automation process, your project will want to be consistent with how you are locating elements. And for most projects, I guess most established projects are using the CSS selector or XPath locators. The reason for this is because with modern applications, the ID attribute, the name attribute, the class name attribute, and all of those, they actually have attribute values that change a lot. So that makes the element dynamic, meaning if you use one of those attributes and attribute values, your test cases could fail because the elements keep changing. The locators or that information keeps changing. So this is why one of the reasons that a lot of companies choose to continue using XPaths or CSS selectors is a very popular choice. Now, again, one of the most time-consuming tasks for test automation engineers using a test automation tool that requires programming is basically inspecting locators. For example, throughout the past videos, I already wrote out the XPaths for you. And if you have the GitHub repository, you can just copy and use those same XPaths. But I also showed you in the beginning of the course how to locate those elements as well so that you can write your own XPaths. And we talked about being able to write different types of relative XPaths and so on. Now, that part can be time consuming, and whenever something is time consuming, we try to find ways to overcome that challenge and find a way to not spend so much time doing that task. So in this video, I'm going to discuss what SelectorsHub is. SelectorsHub is a browser extension and tool for generating and managing XPath and CSS selectors for web elements. It is primarily used by web developers and quality assurance engineers who work with web automation and need to identify and interact with HTML elements on web pages. Remember, what is the whole point of test automation? It's to help us get results quicker so that we can reduce our manual testing time. So remember that test automation is all about efficiency, and hopefully after this video, you get to understand a bit of what that means. So what is SelectorsHub? Now, I'm using Google Chrome, You can use Firefox, you can use Safari, you can use Edge. SelectorsHub is a browser extension that should be available for those browsers. I'm using Chrome, so I just went on Google and typed in SelectorsHub extension, and you'll be prompted to this page here, okay? Now, you see that I have here removed from Chrome because I've already enabled or added this extension. So if you haven't, go ahead and do that. After you do that, I recommend that you fully close your browser. So for Windows, exit this browser, and for those using Macs, make sure to force quit your browsers. Don't just click the X button, okay? Make sure to force quit it. Once that's installed, okay, you go ahead and open your browser again, and I'm going to take you over here to the practice site we've been using all along. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open the developer tools, okay, so that we can see the HTML information of these elements. And I'm going to go ahead and inspect one of these elements here. So we already discussed that you can click on this button here and pretty much inspect any element you want to interact with. Okay, so for example, I want to interact with this element right here. So when I go ahead and click on it, now I did show you some shortcuts to kind of quickly get XPaths here. Okay, so one way to do that is to right click and go to copy, and you can copy selector, the JS path, you can copy the XPath or the absolute XPath. Now the question is, why would we care or try to use a different tool that gives us, for example, an XPath when we can just come here, copy and just copy the XPath, right? So let me go ahead and copy the XPath, right? We understood that the full XPath is the absolute XPath, and that the XPath in most cases gives us a relative XPath example. But let's see what happens when I go ahead and click on this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on copy XPath. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control F or Command F if you're using Mac, so that we can open the search bar here within the elements part of the DevTools. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and paste it here, and you see, even though I copied the XPath, it still gave me an absolute XPath. Okay, let me go ahead and do this again. I'm going to go ahead and copy XPath. So it gives me an absolute XPath or a full XPath instead of a relative XPath. If I go ahead and copy the full XPath, you see it gives me the same, and I'm just pasting it. Now, what's wrong with this? The truth is, there's nothing wrong with it, because if you want to interact with this element, chances are that this locator is going to work. However, it is not good practice to use a full XPath. The reason for that is because right now we're lucky that we get a short XPath, but if you work for with a lot of modern applications today, the browser will give you a very long XPath, and that it's not good practice to have very long XPaths when you can definitely write a much shorter XPath. Also, depending on how you want to interact with the element, just try your best to avoid full XPaths or absolute XPaths when you can. However, we do use them in some occasions, and in the next videos, I'll show you when would be a good idea to use them. Okay, so now it gives us this. Okay, but if I want to use SelectorsHub now, okay, like and I'll show you how to use that right here. On the right side, okay, you have these anchor tags. And by the way, let me just bring this up. I did get some questions and comments earlier in the course saying, hey, how come you have the dev tools down here, but I have it on the right? So if you go ahead and click on these little three buttons here, you actually have different options as to where you want the dev tools to display. So if I go ahead and click on this, you'll see that it's going to be on the right, okay? You can move it to the left if you want as well, so it shows up on the left. You can even make it its own window like this, if that helps you as well. Okay, I found this way to be kind of tricky, but whatever makes you comfortable, whatever makes you happy, right? I personally just like to stick to this view on the bottom and so on, right? But whatever makes you feel more comfortable, do that. Okay, so here, okay, we have these little anchor tags here. If I go ahead and click on it, you see that I have the SelectorsHub extension. The only reason I see that is because this is all the way to the right. You see how I move it to the right? like for example, DOM breakpoints and this option here, event listeners, you see how they slowly disappear as I keep moving this all the way to the right? Well, if I move this all the way to the left, all of those remaining options will start to display like this. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so in most cases, you want this to be bigger than what's on the right. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and I'm going to go ahead and click on SelectorsHub. Okay, now this is my view here. I want to kind of show you how to use this tool really well, or this extension. Okay, if I go ahead and inspect this element again, the same one, okay, right here, you notice that SelectorsHub is giving me a relative XPath. You see it gives you different options, a CSS selector, XPath, an index XPath if you wanted to, and so on. Okay, there are different options here, class name, and so on. Now, if I go ahead and click on this relative XPath, you see that this is the relative XPath that SelectorsHub gives me, and this is what Chrome browser was able to give me. This looks like a much better XPath we can use, even though I guess right now it kind of does look like it's a bit longer than the absolute XPath. But again, when you're working with modern applications, for example, in your projects, you'll find that an absolute XPath can be very long, and that's not what you want to work with. Okay, now here is the thing that I like to mention. On the right hand side, and by the way, this could change depending on when you see this, but this option will be there somewhere. There's an option here that says set attribute. I'm going to go ahead and click on it. Okay, see what comes up. Okay, so there's currently like some sort of bug right now with my SelectorsHub on the browser that I'm using. I suspect that you won't have that. Okay, you see how I kind of have to scroll down a bit here? It's kind of weird. Okay, it's not really so UI friendly. Okay, but if I scroll down just a bit, we see these little check boxes here. Okay, and there's text, there's ID, there's class, there's name. That's because you can basically configure these settings for SelectorsHub to give you an XPath that can contain or remove any of these attributes. Okay, now you see that I have here the ID checkbox unselected. The reason for that is because the ID attribute is known to change a lot for a lot of applications. For a lot of modern applications, the ID attribute value changes a lot. It's dynamic. So if I go ahead and use ID and SelectorsHub gives me an XPath with the ID attribute or attribute value, my test cases could fail. So to avoid that, I'm basically asking SelectorsHub to not give me an XPath that's using the ID attribute and attribute value, but go ahead and use text, class, or name. Now, if you're working with some applications where you find that the name is dynamic or the class is dynamic, you can come here and unselect those as well, and SelectorsHub will give you different options. Okay, now let's talk about SelectorsHub, because this is not the first time that a tool like this has been invented. Previously, there was like a ChromPath or FirePath for, like, for example, Firefox browser and so on. But SelectorsHub is developed much better than those extensions. Okay, it's actually really smart in the way that it grabs or it generates an XPath for you using the HTML elements of the element you want to interact with. Okay, now it's a great tool. Okay, and yes, this is pretty much cheating, because you're getting XPaths here that are basically just, all you have to do is come here, copy it. Okay, and you may see some ads here as well. You can go ahead and pay for it. It's not that expensive. I recommend you pay for it as well. I'm using the paid version, but right now I'm showing you the free version. It's pretty cheap, and the paid version has its features. So if I come here and I copy it, just like that, I'm going to go ahead and paste it here. You have an XPath, okay? And that is so convenient, and it saves you a lot of time. You don't have to spend time writing your XPath and so on, and that kind of thing. So just using this in your project, if you can, will save you a lot of time. Okay, however, you cannot use it with every element, and it's not always going to work. Okay, so that's the hard, unfortunate truth. Okay, there are going to be a lot of times where you are going to have to write your own XPaths. For example, the contains text XPath or the text XPath, and also dynamic XPaths as well, that we will cover later on in this course as well. But for most cases, go ahead and use it. I highly recommend it as a test architect who has led many teams and many test automation teams to use this to improve on the time that it takes you to automate your test cases. Okay, so when you're automating and you realize that it's taking you a bit longer than it should to locate an element, try to use SelectorsHub. Okay, use SelectorsHub when you can. That's why these tools are available to you, available for us, and we are very grateful for folks like this who create these tools in this community to create tools like this that are free for us to use to help us with our work. Right? It's amazing, really, if you think about it. If you are in a project, you realize that if you have an issue, it's very easy to find support on YouTube or Stack Overflow, right? For most of the issues you can be experimenting. So we are in a wonderful community, and that's why test automation is awesome. So you'll notice that in this community, you'll find a lot of folks like myself giving to this community because at some point we've struggled and someone else gave to us, right? So always give when you can. Okay. So moving forward, I will use SelectorsHub, okay, but I will already have my code written out for you. Go ahead and use it, okay? I highly recommend it. I will record other videos to show you when it's appropriate to use an absolute XPath, when not to use SelectorsHub. For example, we need to create a contain test XPath, and then also moving to dynamic elements, okay? So let's come back here and discuss this one more time. Test automation is all about efficiency. It should not be taking you so long to automate your test cases, okay? Wherever it's taking you a long time, try to find ways to reduce that time, okay? Because remember, test automation is supposed to help us, not hurt us. And if you are in a project that has strict rules or strict guidelines, that could be an issue as well. For example, like a government project or some other, like for example, financial institution that's preventing you from using this. Try to raise it, ask someone who could help you implement it, and so on, okay? So I hope this helped you out, and I'll see you guys in the next video.